These inner self-critical thoughts. Wouldn't life be sweet without them? I think we all have them, and we all have to learn to manage them one way or another. So I figured in this episode, let's deep dive into some very concrete examples of how to manage these apparently vicious thoughts that seem to create so much suffering for us. And I'd like to start out by first exploring what they actually are. Well, what I mean by them, it's these thoughts that are like, they tell us that we're not good enough. They tell us that we're not lovable, that we don't belong, that we're worthless, that our bodies are not good the way they are, that we should be better at this, that we shouldn't behave like this, that we're embarrassing, that our essential way of being in the world is, just belittling everything about us. And it's almost like it's been specifically designed to trigger our most deepest wounds. It can be called by many names, but I usually like to refer to them as like the inner critic. It's almost like an entity that attacks us. And before we go into concrete ways of managing it, I'd like to introduce a new perspective, because it's almost like it feels like we have this hostile entity inside of us that actually wants to harm us, like it is our enemy. But I'd like to suggest that it's not our enemy. It's a defense mechanism. It's actually trying to protect us. Usually, this cluster of thoughts were formed when we were quite young. So a child is born into an environment, and as a child, you can't take care of yourself, so you need to be nurtured by the environment. And if your environment is slightly dysfunctional, which I would suggest that basically any human in the history of the world has had a slight dysfunction in the environment they grew up in. It could be terribly dysfunctional, or it could just be minor dysfunction with people being stressed around them, having their own wounds. But usually we get to learn that there are certain ways we need to show up in order to receive nurturing love and care, in order to belong. And that could be anything. It can mean not being too loud. It can mean always listening to the people around us. It can mean managing anger of adults. It could be having to perform for attention. It can mean not being allowed to show your tears or show your sadness. And the way children adapt to this is to develop an inner script. And they usually do that using shame, which is it's an adaptive mechanism. Because that way the child can show up in a way that gives them nurturing care. And the internal script can go kind of like, if you're too loud now, you're not valuable. So the child naturally will not show up in a loud way. Not 100% of the time, of course, but that's kind of the idea of these thoughts. They make sure you stay within boundaries, and it uses shame to allow us to stay within what's accepted by the environment growing up. But once we become adults, it's like this script doesn't really change. It still operates on a childhood level. It still thinks that what was not accepted in childhood, for instance, singing out loud, taking up lots of space, showing your creativity, that was not accepted back then, and this script still thinks that it's not accepted now. While you might be in a completely different environment where that is actually rewarded, and even so, even if it isn't rewarded, you're an adult now. You're much more capable of taking care of yourself. So this self-shrinking is no longer needed. You don't need nurturing from your environment the way you did when you were 2 years old, when you were 5 years old. But those rules still show up in our lives as the inner critic. And why is this important? Well, because the way we relate to the inner critic becomes quite different if we see it as an inner hostile enemy or if we see it as an old protective script that helped keep us safe once. We just need to help it upgrade itself, or rather liberate it, that we don't need it anymore. We need to train ourselves that it's not needed. We're safe within ourselves. The nurturing, the love that we needed from the outside when we were children, we embody it now. It's already, or we might not embody it yet, but we are the source of that. We don't need it from the outside the way we once needed it. Did you already have that perspective on these thoughts, or did it shift something for you? And I guess as my whole channel, I'm not telling you how things are. I'm offering a perspective to see things. I'm still of this perspective that we all carry our own truth. We know ourselves more intimate than anyone else. None of us showed up on this world with a script or a manual what it's like to be human. And that means that all the theories we have about humanness, all the theories we have about shame, anger, love, they are all theories. If they don't apply to us, to our condition, or the way we live, that doesn't make us wrong. It might be that the scripts or the way you explain shame or inner critic was developed by someone who lived in a different context. And why is this important for me? I always want everything I say to be kind of self-referential in the way that when you hear me speak, check in with yourself. Is this true for me? Is this helpful for me? Is it nurturing? It might be discomfortable to hear it, but am I self-abandoning? Am I abandoning what feels true for me by taking on board this new perspective? Okay, so that was a detour. Yeah. So looking at these critical thoughts from a perspective of being helpers rather than being enemies, we can work with them differently. And one way to do that, this is actually quite a surprising way how we can work with these thoughts. If we see it as a protective mechanism, then it actually wants our best. So in some cases, it's actually enough to tell it to step back. This might sound a bit odd, but it has worked for me. And sometimes you can even say it out loud, like you focus on these thoughts within yourself, and you say, you know what? I would like you to step back. I'd like to handle this a different way, and I can handle the consequences. So there's 3 points in this. It's asking it to step back, it's saying that you can handle it, and that you're willing to take the consequences. Because these thoughts, they're trying to save you from the consequences. They are afraid that if you act like this, you won't belong. But if you tell them straight out that I'm willing to risk not belonging in this group, sometimes the thoughts amazingly go a bit quiet. Can you please step back? I want to handle this a different way, and I'm ready to meet the consequences. And if that doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't, these thoughts can be very, very vicious. They know our absolute most soft spots or most tender spots. Another way to do it is to imagine the inner critic as something other than he usually shows up. We all have our different versions of inner critics, and usually it's a powerful voice in whatever ways that look for us. So one way is actually to change the way it speaks to us. If it has like this powerful voice as though it's coming from the core of the earth, you can make it into a very tweaky little cartoonish war voice and just see what happens to its power. If it's telling you that, oh, you're not valuable and nobody loves you, if that comes in a squeaky little tiny voice, does it really have that much of a power over you? It might, but it might be worth testing. Another way to play with that is to make it into singing. If it comes in the form of an opera or a musical, is it as threatening? Do you feel as belittled by it? If you imagine that it comes from an actor on stage, singing from the top of her or his lungs, maybe you can make it into a Mary Poppins scene, where it says, your body shape is out of alignment and you should have more or less muscles. Maybe it doesn't touch the same core. You could even imagine it being a little cartoon. It doesn't come from the voice of the Almighty. No, it comes from this little tiny frog figure who is all shiny green. Does it have the same power over you? The trick is always to try and reduce the illusion of power. Our mind is very cunning in that way. It has built up what you believe is really powerful. But you can play around with that on the inside. And it's easy to fall into the trap, or this is like a normal one is that when our mind starts saying vicious things to us, we start arguing. It might say that, oh, your delivery on this project was really suboptimal. I'm pretty sure all your colleagues think that you are completely incompetent and no one can even imagine that you have any kind of education and this is just pathetic and blah, blah, blah. What we usually do is that we come with counter arguments. We say that, oh no, but it was just as good as this other colleague. She did blah, blah. That's a big one. As soon as you start to argue with it, it usually counter moves you with two more things that you actually suck at. So if you notice yourself starting to argue with this thing, take a deep breath. Because as soon as you've gone into that, you've already fallen into the trap of energizing it. It happens easily, but if you argue with it, you strengthen it. So if you notice, then just pause and breathe deeply. And also to say that I might sound like a bit of a joyful voice now, of like, oh, the inner critic, you can play around with it. And the reason I'm doing that is because I find it's true, but I'm not trying to invalidate the suffering it can actually cause. Our inner critics can be terrible if it gets hold of us. It can drive people to suicide. I am not minimalizing the power it seems to have over us. I'm trying to point to the fact that this power is illusional. It doesn't have any power that we doesn't give it. Or like it only has the power that we give it. That's what I'm trying to point to. I'm not minimalizing the suffering that inner critics can produce. And on that note, if you feel like in this moment or in any moment that your inner critic is too strong, that is not a failure on your side. It was designed to trick you into thinking that it has power. It is actually you tricking your own mind. You don't fail because you cannot stand up to your inner critic, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help. And one of those survival things is that once the inner critic gets hold of us, it could be like a tornado where we just completely rushes into feeling completely lacking value and feels like we're being attacked from every angle. It can be unbearable. One of the easiest way, or one of these little lifeboats, is to anchor ourselves in the now. Physically, maybe touch your body. Make sure that you focus on some physical sensation, your feet on the floor, Maybe look around, mention furniture or whatever you see. Whatever you can do that's quite tangible, then does not put focus on your thoughts from the inner critic. Yeah. That felt important to say. Taking things lightly and joke about it does not minimize the impact it can have. But taking it too serious all the time is almost always also reinforcing the fact that it has power. No, it doesn't have power. It has the illusion of power. And once you see that, sometimes when we get a hold of that, of realizing that, oh, it doesn't have power over me, can almost come like a laughter. It's like this realization within yourself that, hang on, it is not coming power from the outside. It is using my power against myself. And you might even be able to discover that inside of you, you have almost split into two different entities. There is one that's like the inner critic, and then there's one entity who's a bit of a victim role. And you're actually both of them. You are the perpetrator that, or it feels like the inner critic is a perpetrator, but you're also the victim. And maybe you can even like wobble between them and realize that, oh, I am the force that is being really critical, and I am the little feeling of being a victim that's receiving all of this. But actually, I am the space within which they both arise. For me personally, that's actually the ultimate liberation. That's kind of the end goal, so to speak. That's total liberation from the inner critic. But to get to this realization, you might have to play the tricks of making it smaller, making it squeaky, making it into a figure just to get that initial little distance, seeing the illusion of power, how my mind is manifesting this whole charade. But seeing that you are the space in which the inner critic and the victim arises, that's the ultimate liberation. Getting there though, whatever tricks works for you. And I have more up my sleeve. Yeah. Another one that was actually one of my first. I read a book that talked about there are some thoughts that you have heard for decades. They usually start the same way. And then they escalate, and it's almost like when you hear the first sentence, you know where this is going to go. It's going to start out with saying like, whatever it says for you, but let's say it says, did you really finish that task fast enough? And you go like, yeah, I did my best. And they say, oh, you did your best, like this time you failed? Oh, no, not like that. I think actually, but I didn't have time. No, because you never have time because you're lazy at planning. Oh, but I planned my best. And you know the spiral. You've been in this thousands of times. And what the book suggested was that look at it as an old tape recorder. It's almost like someone pressed play, and it only has one track. And that reduced a lot of its intensity for me. I was like, oh, here we go again. It's that old record playing. I said tape recorder. I'm jumping between timelines now. When I was young, it was this, I don't know the English word, but you know, the one you can screw with a pen, a tape with audio. So I imagine this inner critic being a little audio tape. And as soon as I recognized the intro, I could just go like, I don't want to listen to that again. I've listened to that so many times. And that made it easier to not pay so much attention. I didn't even need to press stop. I didn't need to force stop it. I could just be like, oh, I'm sick of that. I've heard it too many times. So that's another one. Are these new to you? Or have you heard them before? Maybe you have even your own kind of tricks that makes you not listen to these critical thoughts. Another one for me that's quite efficient, but usually it requires to have a little bit of distance already. But remember what I said in the beginning? If you look at this entity as something that's actually trying to protect you from something, that means that it is afraid that you're not going to be seen as lovable. It's afraid you're not going to belong. It's afraid you're not going to be seen as valuable. So there's a fear within this entity in that sense, from that perspective. So if it starts going, it says like, oh, you're always shit with money. This is how it's going to go. Remember the time when you spend money, blah, 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 blah. Instead of going into defense mode with it, you could go the opposite way of seeing it as this little poor creature who is engulfed by fear. So you give it empathy. This is a pretty sweet role play. You go like, oh, sweetheart, I hear there's lots of emotions in you right now. Yes, I can hear that you're upset. Can you tell me what it's about? And the beautiful thing about this is that sometimes you can actually be allowed in. What comes up might be this deep sorrow. You can access the fear of not being lovable. And you can feel the emotions going through you. And in a way, that can be a very, I was about to say healing moment, because I mean that it is healing, but not healing in the sense that something in you is broken. Rather maybe a melting moment for this entrenched way of thinking. It's almost like it's losing in its grip. It is accessing what it needs to melt, to not show up so much anymore. And that is that rather than listen to this, well, your finance situation, you practice to go closer to the pain, closer to the wound, the fear of not being valuable, or whatever it might be. It might say something else. And that might be a bit painful, or like that's strong emotions. So you might have to sit with those instead. But that's a completely different journey than trying to defend something that feels like it's attacking you. So to show empathy to this critic that shows up in quite a nasty way, but if it's available, to treat it with love. Treat it the opposite way of how it shows up. And if you listen to my channel, or if you used to listen to my channel, then I speak a lot about you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions. And I still stand by that. That is the ultimate liberation. When we can just allow our mind to run its scripts and we're just holding the holding the awareness of where it pops up. But the reason I wanted to bring up the inner critic is because these thoughts are extra sticky. These are the ones when it's really hard to access that inner spaciousness, that vastness that is our essence. To really be so objective that the thoughts hold no power over me. These thoughts, they enter into our absolute deepest conditioning and pushes those buttons. Sometimes we need an intermediate steps. And this way of playing around with our inner critic is a way to do that. Another way, I didn't even mention, is pretending that your inner critics speak a different language. This is one of the ones where you can also play around with that you're not your thoughts. And actually, if you would like to explore that some more, I have a whole video on exercises you can do to check whether you are actually your thoughts or where your thoughts are coming from. But in this instance, with the inner critic, if I didn't speak the language that my inner critic is speaking, I wouldn't be touched. If it says that, oh, this part of your body is blah, blah, blah. If I didn't understand the language, it would just be a melody. It would be like a walla walla ball. And I wouldn't be touched. It would just be a movement within me. And that's also a way to see through the power that the inner critic has. To imagine that it's talking to you in a language you don't understand, like in a Narnia language, in a Lord of the Rings kind of accent. Yeah. The inner critic often wants us to bring in seriousness because it gives its power. It gives it power. It validates its power. So playfulness can be a way of dismantling that, but not playfulness in the sense of minimalizing or like removing the seriousness of it or the harm that it can impact. Yeah, I already went through that. Yeah. This has been a big journey, a big step for my own journey with myself. And I can see the harm it causes in all of society. These inner thoughts we have about ourselves, the way we shame ourselves. What was once a survival strategy which we were lucky to have, in our adult life becomes an obstacle, something that keeps us smaller than we are, which is no longer needed. And I think part of fully embodying life, of becoming real manifestations of life, adult manifestations of life, is to dismantle this little cocoon that was needed for us to grow up. We no longer need it. It is not there as a punishment. It was there as a protection. Yes. I think we reached the end of the session. And if you have any thoughts, any questions, anything you'd like to share, then please do utilize the comment section. I love hearing your reflections. Yes. And if you're new to my channel, my name is Josephine. Warmly welcome on board. And if you're a regular viewer, then I'm glad to have you back, my friend. Hope to see you next time.